Okay, so welcome to the deep dive, everybody. We always try to pick really fascinating topics, and today is no exception. We're going to be diving into the world of doping and cheating in pro sports, which is something that I think a lot of people feel very strongly about, but
Absolutely.
maybe don't always understand all the nuances,
Right.
the ins and outs of it. So, to help guide us through this, we've actually taken a mini dive, that's what we do here, into a recent episode of the Game Changers show. Have you heard of that one?
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's I've listened to a few episodes. It's good.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
And they had I thought, a really interesting discussion about this topic with Dr. Emily Carter, who is a sports scientist. So she brings like a real scientific perspective to it.
The real technical side of things.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then also Jake Thompson, who is a former pro cyclist. And so he kind of brings that firsthand experience.
Oh, wow. So like
Yeah.
he's seen it all, from the inside.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So it was really interesting to kind of get both of those perspectives. So what we're going to do today is really distill what we learned from that episode, share some of the key insights,
Also.
and really just try to kind of give you a clearer understanding of, why this happens, what the impact is, all that kind of stuff.
I think it's really fascinating to look at the reasons behind it,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
because I feel like so much of the conversation around doping is about the
The blame,
yeah, the blame, the outrage, which are all fair.
right?
But I think it's super important to understand, like, how does an athlete even get to that point, you know?
Exactly, exactly. So we're going to touch on that, the why, the what. We're going to talk about the responsibilities of these governing bodies.
Like, what's their role?
Yeah, are they doing enough?
Yeah, exactly.
And even like what are the arguments for and against legalizing it?
Well, okay. That's a whole other can of worms, I think.
It is, it is. But that actually came up in the episode, and I think it's an important discussion to have
Definitely.
because it's not like a black and white issue. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? It's very, very complicated. We're also going to touch on kind of like the broader systemic problems,
So not just the individual athletes, but like
Yeah.
the whole environment.
Yeah, like is this an individual problem or is it like a cultural systemic problem within certain sports?
Right.
Right. And then what are some potential solutions?
Yeah.
Because obviously it's a problem. So what do we do about it? So we're going to cover all that today. I think it'll be really, really insightful.
Sounds good. I'm ready.
Yeah, me too. So I think the most natural place to start is with that question of, why do athletes dope?
Yeah.
Dr. Carter, she put it very simply. She said it's pressure, just immense pressure at that elite level.
I can imagine.
Right. These athletes, they've dedicated their whole lives. They've been training since they were kids.
To get to that top.
Yeah, yeah, to reach that pick. And then there's so much at stake. It's not just like the glory of winning, which, I'm sure is a huge motivator.
Of course.
That's also the money.
Right. The sponsorships, the contract.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking life-changing money in some of these sports. So you can kind of see how the temptation to get an edge, any edge, could become really, really strong.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, everyone's always looking for that extra 1%, right?
Right, exactly. And Jake Thompson's story was really, really interesting because he talked about this kind of unspoken understanding, at least in cycling when he was competing, that like doping was just part of the game.
Really? So like everyone was doing it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he didn't say everyone, but it was heavily implied.
Wow.
That's intense.
Yeah. And he basically said, like, if you weren't doing it, you were putting yourself at a massive disadvantage.
So it wasn't even about like getting ahead necessarily. It was about
Keeping up.
keeping up. Yeah.
Just staying in the game. Wow. That's a crazy thing to think about, like that pressure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's interesting because it's he talked about how it wasn't always like, they didn't just jump right into like hardcore doping. It
Yeah.
was kind of a slippery slope. You know what I mean?
Oh, like a gradual thing.
Yeah, it might start with like some supplements,
Right.
things that are legal,
Right.
that are marketed for, recovery or whatever.
Performance enhancement even.
Yeah, exactly.
But within the rules.
Right. But then maybe, a coach or a teammate suggests something a little stronger, a little bit more, on the edge.
Oh, so it's like a gray area kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And then before you know it, you're kind of in this world where you feel like you can't compete without it.
That's scary. Like, how do you even get out of that cycle once you're in it?
Right. And I think that's a big part of the problem, It's not always a conscious decision to like blatantly cheat. It's this gradual thing, and then once you're in it, it's hard to get out.
It's like a system almost, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, exactly. And the other thing that Jake Thompson kind of alluded to was that sometimes it felt like, the organizations that were supposed to be preventing this,
Like the governing bodies.
yeah, the governing bodies, that
Uh-huh.
they weren't really looking that hard.
Interesting.
Like they would turn a blind eye until it became a huge scandal.
So it's almost like they were complicit.
Yeah,
That-
yeah. I mean, he didn't say that outright, but he definitely kind of hinted at it, which brings us to, what is the responsibility of these governing bodies?
Yeah, like what are they supposed to be doing?
Right. And Dr. Carter talked about how it's really complicated
I bet.
because on one hand, you have organizations like WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, and the Olympic movement.
Right, the Olympics are like huge.
Right. And they have, generally speaking, pretty strict anti-doping policies.
And pretty good testing protocols too, I'd imagine.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're considered to be, the gold standard, I guess you could say, in terms
Yeah.
of preventing doping. But then you have other sports organizations that have been, accused of having way more lax testing.
Really? Like more relaxed.
Yeah, and not punishing athletes as harshly.
So there's like a disparity even
Yeah,
across
huge disparity.
different sports.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Carter also pointed out, science is always evolving, right? So people are always coming up with new drugs, new masking agents.
It's like a cat and mouse game almost.
It is. It is. It's like as soon as they figure out how to test for one thing, there's a new thing out there.
Right, too.
Right. So it's really, really hard to stay ahead of it. And then she brought up something that I thought was super interesting, which is, when you have these big name athletes,
Like the superstars.
yeah, the superstars who bring in tons of money for the sport,
Right, the merchandise, the ticket sales.
all of it. Right. Is there a conflict of interest there?
Oh, you mean like the organizations might not want to
Catch them.
catch them doping? Because it would hurt.
Hurt the sport, hurt their bottom line.
Yeah. It's a tough one.
Yeah. I mean, how do you balance, keeping the sport clean with, the financial realities of it?
Right, because they're businesses too, at the end of the day.
They are. So it's a tricky situation. So that's kind of the governing bodies, right?
Mm.
And then there's this whole other debate about legalizing it,
Oh, yeah. Okay, let's get into that.
which is really fascinating, I think.
I'm curious to hear what they had to say about that.
Yeah. So the argument for legalizing it, and Jake Thompson kind of touched on this, is that if everyone has access to the same stuff,
It levels the playing field.
it levels the playing field.
Right.
Right. So it's not about who's cheating and who's not. It's about, who can push their body the furthest.
Right, I see. So it becomes more about like the training and the dedication.
Yeah, exactly. Like who can handle it, essentially.
Right.
Right. But both Jake Thompson and Dr. Carter, they were pretty strongly against legalizing it, and for some pretty good reasons, I think.
Like what? What were their concerns?
Well, Jake Thompson, he talked about, from his experience, seeing a lot of athletes suffer really serious health problems
Oh,
from using these substances.
what kind of health problems?
Heart problems, strokes, mental
Yeah.
breakdowns.
Really? That's serious.
Yeah. It's not, it's not just, oh, you might get caught, you might get banned. It's your health.
Right, it's like your life.
Yeah, exactly. And Dr. Carter, she kind of echoed that, saying that the human body has limits,
Yeah.
and when you start pushing past those limits with these drugs,
You're going to pay the price?
you're going to pay the price. Yeah. And she also talked about the message it would send to young athletes.
Right, like aspiring athletes?
Yeah, like if you want to succeed, you have to take these risks. You have to,
Put your health on the line?
put your health on the line.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a really dangerous message to send.
Yeah, definitely. And wouldn't it also kind of like undermine the whole spirit of sport,
Yeah.
Like, isn't it supposed to be about natural ability and hard work?
Right. And the other thing that Dr. Carter brought up was like, even if you legalize it, is it really going to be a level playing field?
Oh, interesting point. Like, why not?
Because it would just become a pharmaceutical arms race, essentially.
Oh, I see.
Right. It would be about who has access to the best scientists, the newest drugs, the most effective masking agents.
So it would just be another kind of competition, but instead of like training, it would be about...
Drugs, yeah.
Yeah. So it wouldn't really solve the problem, I don't think.
No, it would just change it. Exactly. Okay, so, we've talked about the athletes, we've talked about the governing bodies and this idea of legalization, But I think it's really important to talk about this idea that, like, is this just an individual athlete's problem? Or is it something bigger?
Right. That systemic thing we were talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And Dr. Carter was very clear that she thinks athletes are often made into scapegoats.
Oh, interesting.
You know, like they're the ones who get caught, they're the ones who get punished.
But there's a whole system behind them.
Yeah, and the system often goes unpunished.
Right.
And she used Lance Armstrong as an example.
Oh, yeah. That was a huge scandal.
Huge scandal, right. But she was saying, like, banning Lance Armstrong didn't fix the problem.
No, because it was more than just him.
Exactly. It was a culture of doping within that sport, you know?
Right. So it's like you can punish the individual, but if you don't address the culture, then it's just going to keep happening.
Exactly, exactly. And Jake Thompson was really good on this too, because he talked about how it's rarely just the athlete's decision, you know? There are often coaches, sponsors, even entire teams
That are involved.
that are involved that are pushing athletes to do this.
Wow.
Yeah, and it creates this cycle, right?
Yeah.
Because one athlete gets caught, they get banned, but then they're just replaced by another athlete who's willing to do the same thing.
Right, because the incentives are still there.
The incentives are still there, the pressure is still there, the culture is still there.
Exactly.
Yeah. So both of them really stressed that, like, the organizations need to take more responsibility for this.
Not just punish the athletes, but also the people who are enabling it.
Exactly, exactly. So punish the coaches, punish the team officials, you know, anyone who's involved in pushing this.
Right. Like hold them accountable to.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, so, you know, that all sounds pretty bleak, but what are some potential solutions? Like, what can we actually do about this?
Yeah, I'm curious to hear what they suggested.
Well, Dr. Carter, she talked a lot about education.
Oh, that makes sense. Like starting young.
Yeah, like start with young athletes, you know, teach them about the values of clean sport.
Right. Before they even get into that world.
Exactly, exactly. And then, you know, obviously stricter regulations.
Right. Like stronger rules.
Stronger rules, more consistent testing. And she also said, like, we need independent testing agencies.
Oh, so they're not influenced by...
Not influenced by the sport itself, yeah.
That makes sense.
Right, because like we talked about, there might be conflicts of interest there.
Right, right.
So you need somebody who's totally independent. And then she also talked about, you know, it can't just be about rules, it has to be about a culture shift.
Oh, that's interesting. So like changing the whole mindset around doping.
Yeah, like fans, sponsors, the media, we all need to stop glorifying, you know, achievements without questioning how they were achieved.
Right. Like don't just celebrate the win, but look at like how did they get there?
Exactly, exactly. And then Jake Thompson, he brought up a really good point, which is like, we need to protect whistleblowers.
Oh, yeah, the people who speak out.
Yeah.
Because they're taking a huge risk.
Huge risk. They could lose their career, you know?
Exactly.
So he was saying, like, we need to make it safe for them to come forward.
So they could expose what's really going on?
Yeah, yeah. And he also said, like, lifetime bans for enablers.
Whoa.
Yeah, like if you're a coach and you're caught, you know, pushing drugs on your athletes,
Done.
you're done. You're out of the sport for life.
That would definitely send a message.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it would. So, you know, it's a really complex issue. There's no easy answers. But, you know, I think Jake Thompson summed it up really well. He said, we need to get back to the heart of sport.
Like what it's really supposed to be about.
Yeah. Like the passion, the dedication, the natural talent, you know, not about who can cheat the best. Right. So I think, you know, as we wrap up this deep dive, we've kind of touched on all the main points, right? The pressure, the regulations, the legalization debate, the systemic issues, and some potential solutions. And it all kind of comes down to this question that they posed at the end of the Game Changers episode, which is, should we be stricter with our anti-doping policies, or do we need to completely rethink the rules?
That's a big question.
It is a big question, and I don't think there's an easy answer. But it's something that we need to be thinking about, you know, as fans, as people who care about sports. Like, what do we want the future of sports to look like? And how do we make sure that it's fair, that it's safe for the athletes, and that it's really about celebrating, you know, human achievement?
Absolutely.
So I hope this deep dive has given you all some food for thought. It's a complex issue, but I think the more we understand it, the better equipped we are to, you know, demand change and make sure that sports are what they're supposed to be.
Right.
So that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Until next time.
See you later.
Bye.